Alaska is known for its beautiful, untouched wilderness, but beneath its stunning landscapes lie countless mysteries and eerie disappearances. In this story, we follow a young boy who sets out to hunt a deer, only to find himself lost in an endless cycle, haunted by strange voices and an animal that seems more spirit than prey. As he struggles to find his way back, he encounters the inexplicable, and something he never could have prepared for. Prepare yourself for a chilling tale of survival and supernatural guidance in Alaska's untamed backcountry. The first 2 years after my family and I moved to Alaska, we had a hard time adjusting to the Alaskan daylight. During the summer, days can be incredibly long, sometimes lasting 20 to 24 hours. In the winter, daylight is very short, only about 4 to 6 hours, although it depends on where you live. If you're in northern Alaska, daylight stretches even longer in the summer. For those who enjoy hunting, Alaska might be an ideal place, thanks to the extended hunting season. When we first moved, we rented a house on a large property. The landlord was part Native Alaskan and part Russian, and he and his family lived on the other side of the hill. The house we stayed in belonged to his family, who were Native American. According to him, we could hunt on his property as long as we rented the house and paid on time. At that time, I was only 11 years old. The house seemed okay, but at night, we'd sometimes hear whistling outside, both in the backyard and front yard. My father loved to whistle, especially the folk songs that he grew up listening to. He'd often whistle those tunes while working in the backyard. So whenever we heard whistling, at night, if it wasn't the folk songs, we knew it wasn't my father. We kids liked staying up late watching TV or playing video games, so we often heard it. Eventually our parents noticed the whistling too. They asked if any of us had gone outside at night to whistle, but we hadn't. At first, it was only the whistling. Soon, we started hearing light knocks on the front door, back door, and windows. The knocking sounded as if wind were blowing branches against the house, but if you listened closely, it had a distinct pattern. Besides, there were no trees close enough to actually hit the doors or windows. When it came to hunting small game on the property, my father loved using a crossbow that he made himself. One evening he was out back, sitting on the steps and carving arrows from tree branches. Just then, he heard a knock on the side window. He looked up and saw a dark, transparent figure standing outside, lightly tapping on the glass. My father came inside and quietly gestured for me to grab his hunting rifle from the cabinet. I handed it to him, and he told me to get mine as well. Together, we stepped out into the backyard and saw two shadowy figures walking through our makeshift fence. The shadows moved quickly enough to stay ahead of us, just out of clear view. My father and I followed them, with him muttering under his breath, "These spirits keep knocking on our doors and windows. Let's follow them and see where they come from." We followed the shadows for a good 20 minutes. The landlord's property was vast, and we crossed over a hill, eventually losing sight of the figures. When we went down the other side, we noticed two graves ahead. My father shone his flashlight on them, and we realized where the shadows had led us. My father seemed spooked and suggested we head back, so we returned home. The next day, my father burned joss paper for the spirits, asking them to leave us alone. For those unfamiliar with the tradition of burning joss papers, it's a ritual that allows the living to offer symbolic money to the deceased. My father instructed us kids not to react if we heard whistling or knocking at night. Just turn off the lights, stay inside, and ignore it. That month, when my father delivered the rent, he told the landlord about our strange encounter and the graves. The landlord smiled and explained that those were his grandparents, who had once owned the land and had wanted to be buried there. One day, my father went outside and tied some wooden shamanic knives coated in chicken droppings to the fences. He also cut joss paper figures and placed them on our doors and windows, along with red corn. Every culture has its own ways of protecting their family from spirits. Some people bury things in their yards to appease spirits. For us, hanging wooden knives and red corn is a way of repelling spirits. After that, the whistling and knocking stopped. However, we started noticing things being thrown at our doors and windows at night, as if something couldn't get past the red corn and wooden knives, so it stayed at a distance, tossing things toward the house. Whenever this happened, my father would tell us to turn everything off and go to bed. Once all the lights were out, the activity would stop. It was as if something in that land didn't want us up late with the lights on. Oddly, the light bulbs outside our doors needed frequent replacement, sometimes every 2 months, which was unusual. One day I was home with my 2 sisters. I was already 14 years old at the time. I was playing a video game when I noticed something moving outside in our backyard. I looked and saw a deer with long antlers just outside, eating the low leaves of a tree. I paused my game, grabbed my rifle from the metal cabinet, picked up my hunting bag, put on my camo jacket, and went outside. I saw the deer already starting to walk back into the forest. I slowly followed it, hoping it wouldn't notice me. Every time it stopped, I would stop, crouch down, and aim at it from behind. But I didn't want to shoot it from behind. I was waiting for it to turn to the side. This deer was kind of strange. Usually, a deer with antlers that long would be big, but this one was short and small, like a dwarf deer. I continued to follow it into the forest. I looked back and could still see our house through the trees. I kept following the deer. Eventually it stopped and turned back to look at me. It must have heard me or something. I aimed, but it didn't run away. It just stood there, looking at me. I was afraid it might charge at me, so I shot. I didn't hit anything. The deer just kept looking at me. I got a bit closer and aimed again. I couldn't believe I missed again. The deer, strangely, still just looked at me and didn't run away. This time, I got really close to it. The deer seemed like it was used to people or something. Maybe someone had been feeding it. I got within about 20 feet, which is very close. I aimed at its head. This time the deer ran away, lowering its head and shaking it. I saw blood splatter all over the trees and bushes. I knew I had hit it well, so I continued to follow it as it ran. I could see blood on the tree trunks and bushes. I thought eventually I'd come upon a dead deer. But the deer seemed to have more blood than I expected. I kept following it for a good 20 minutes, but I didn't find a dead deer anywhere. Then, up ahead, I saw it just standing there, looking at me again. A line of blood was running down its face as it looked at me and wiggled its ears. I aimed again, but it ran to the right as I fired. I felt like I had another shot in, but the deer kept running. I started following it, tracking the blood trail as it crossed a small, clear creek. Once I crossed the creek, I saw the deer again, standing and looking at me with blood still coming down its face. I aimed and shot again. It just started walking away. I wasn't sure if I hit it or not. I kept following it, thinking at some point it would just collapse and die from blood loss. I kept going until we were on a hill, and when I looked down, I could see our house far away through the trees. It was strange. I thought I'd followed the deer for so long that I'd be far away from our house, maybe even off our landlord's property. But I kept going because I felt like I had a good shot. The deer would eventually die. Ahead, the deer was still looking at me, this time with no blood on its face. I got closer, about 20 feet away, and shot at its head again. It started running, putting its head down and shaking it, blood splattering the trees and bushes again. I couldn't believe I'd hit it again. I was sure it would die soon. But as I continued to follow, I saw it once more, just looking at me and wiggling its ears. I aimed, and it ran to the right as I fired. I thought I hit it in the body this time. I continued, crossing a little creek again, and after a while, I realized I'd crossed this creek multiple times without realizing it. Somehow, I kept seeing the same deer, shooting at it, then crossing the creek, again and again. After a while, I started to worry. I wasn't scared of the deer, but I wasn't sure it was a deer anymore. We do have a belief that this is how some people become lost in the forest. Some spirits can make you chase after them until you're lost and couldn't find your way back. When I saw the deer again, I decided to turn back and find my way home. But no matter which direction I went, I'd cross the creek and eventually see the deer up ahead, looking at me and wiggling its ears. This time I didn't shoot. I kept walking until I came to a hill where, through the trees, I could see our house far away. I started heading down the hill toward the house, but each time I'd end up crossing the creek again. This happened over and over, and eventually, I became so frustrated that I wished the creek would just dry up. I was becoming angry at the creek because it was the only thing that reminds me I was lost. I'd be up on a hill again, see our house, start toward it, and end up crossing the creek again. Finally, I just sat by the creek and started crying. Instead of crossing the creek, I turned back, kept walking, and ended up back at the creek again. We live in northern Alaska, where daytime lasts about 22 to 24 hours, so I could still see the sun. As I sat by the creek crying, I heard two people talking nearby. I wasn't sure what language they were speaking, though. I got up and started following the voices. Again, they spoke in a language I didn't understand. I called out, "Hello? Is anyone there? I'm lost. I need help." When I said this, the voices stopped for about 10 seconds, then resumed. I just kept going towards the direction of the voices. Eventually, I came across two graves. The first time my father and I saw them, we were scared. But now, when I saw them, I felt relieved and happy. I knew where I was. I walked past the graves, over to the other side of the hill, and finally remembered the way home. After a good 20 minutes, I made it back. Our relatives were at the house with my family, along with the police and a rescue team. Everyone had been searching for me, including some of my hunting relatives and even our landlord. My father asked where I'd been. He took my rifle, looked at the magazine, and noticed that not a single shot had been fired. I swore to him that I'd been shooting at the deer. It was so strange. According to my family, I'd been missing for 68 hours. I couldn't believe it. I don't remember it ever getting dark or nighttime while I was gone. How strange. I told my family and the police everything. My father said that the previous day, he prayed to our ancestors for my safe return. He also burned some joss papers to ask the land's guardians to guide me home. My father believes the spirits from the two graves led me back. I don't know what happened in that area, but I truly believe it's haunted. Alaska has the highest number of missing people in the US, and many are never found. I'm just glad I made it home. Like my father, I believe the spirits of those two graves were the guardians of that area and guided me back. The strange part is, our landlord said something similar happened to his daughter once. She was playing in the backyard when she saw a small red panda. She followed it and went missing for 36 hours before returning to their backyard. She too said she followed a voice home. But the truth is, there are no red pandas in Alaska. That's all for this video. Thank you for making all the way through and supporting my stories. Have a wonderful day or night.